All right, what I want to do, quite briefly, is touch on different aspects of the steel band, be it performing, arranging, composing. First thing I'd like to do for you is just play a little. All right, this is, well, I was supposed to have some accompaniment, but they disappeared on me. We're going to do a piece from Brazil that may be familiar to some of you, called Teague.
Yo, where you at? Where you at?
Could you show us a little bit of...
On the line to the goes like that?
Thank you very much. What I'd like to do now for you is also play in another style. This is a composition by my mother's favorite composer, me. And this is a piece I wrote when I was about 15 years old, and it's all about showcasing the various possibilities of the steel pan. The pioneers of this instrument, they always wanted to demonstrate the legitimacy of the steel pan as a true instrument, not as a novelty. So this piece is entitled Raindrops. I'll play you an abbreviated version of it. And then we can talk a little bit about technique, and I'll leave the floor open for a few questions, okay? you very much. Are there any questions so far? Questions, concerns, comments? Any? Yes, sir. No, that was actually part of the piece. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. Yeah, no, that's so important, guys. Because at the end of the day, when people pay money to hear you play, they don't really appreciate any kind of slip up. So you have to make it seem as if it was part of the show. Although we all knew that it wasn't part of the show, but still. So keep your composure and try to be as confident as possible when you get on stage. If anybody that knows me really well will know I'm a very shy person. But once I get on stage, that changes. It transforms. Once I get off stage again, it's like pulling teeth, trying to talk to me most times, Any questions? Yes? How long have you had your pen for? Question is, how long have I had this instrument for? Probably well over 15 years. It's a very interesting story about this instrument. I started playing in a steel band in Trinidad called the Teague Motown. And for some reason, they didn't want this instrument, so they just had it in their storeroom. And it got, rusty and very, very waterlogged. Because if you see inside the instrument, it's very, very odd looking. But I just had it re-chromed and retuned. And the gentleman who tunes my instrument is Cliff Alexis, who also works with me at Northern Illinois University. And he's just a pure genius, And so I've had this instrument for quite a while, and it's been very, very good to me. So, let me just talk a little bit about technique as it relates to how I envision technique on the steel pan. Now, I always say that I try not to be dogmatic about anything, meaning I'm not going to tell you that this is the only way to approach playing the steel pan. This is just my way. It's what's worked for me for a number of years. The first thing that I always try to do is to think about this as an instrument, not as something that you beat the living daylights out of. Okay, that's very, very important. And what I observed today from all of the schools was a very, very nice touch. So I think that bodes well for the future of this instrument. Now, this particular soprano pan, or tenor pan as we call it in Trinidad, is laid out differently to most of the ones that you probably play. This is not in intervals of fourths and fifths, it's actually in thirds and fourths. The lowest pitch on my instrument is E flat 4, which is E flat just above middle C. And the highest note is F sharp 6, first ledger line F sharp. So if I had to play a chromatic scale, it would look like this. So forth. So it will take a little while to get accustomed to that layout. And this is one of the oldest layouts of soprano pans in existence. Some of you may have heard about the Invaders layout. This is a hybrid of that, and then came the fourths and fifths. Now, when I practice, as I said earlier on, I try to play everything as quietly as possible. So if you guys can hear me, right? Yeah. Okay. So if I'm working on a chromatic scale, I left my best friend in the office, but my best friend is my metronome. I highly encourage you guys to practice with a metronome. I don't care how good you think your time is, it's not going to be better than a metronome. It keeps you solid. The thing about it is though, you don't want to be overly reliant on practicing with a metronome, because then you're not going to develop a good internal sense of time. So you need to have a balance, okay? So if I'm practicing a chromatic scale, I do it at a leisurely tempo. If this is my goal tempo, first of all, I practice slow and pianissimo. I do that a few times, gradually increase the tempo with the metronome. It's very important to know, keep record of the tempos you're working at. And I keep going. And that's really to try and minimize on any of the notes jumping out at you. You really don't want this type of thing when you're playing an instrument. and or arranger ask for that. Ask for an attack on a particular note. You want to try and keep it smooth. All right? And that type of approach really helps me when I'm playing pieces that are more 16th note oriented. For example, if I'm playing Moto Perpetuo, Perpetual Motion by Paganini, which is a huge showpiece for the violin, and I want to definitely demonstrate the potential of this instrument as being legitimate. I have to practice like that. So if I'm playing this piece, and that goes on for about 4 minutes, I can't play it like, right? Especially for musicians, they want to appreciate that type of approach. So I can't, recommend that enough to you guys. The other thing about practicing is practicing in a practical fashion. Of course, we're all told to practice our scales and arpeggios, and that's fine. But you also need to practice them in a way that you're actually going to use them. For example, again, going back to the chromatic scale, what I try to do is to find different permutations of that. And always try testing myself, pushing the envelope. So I might do this, E flat to E flat. Then I'll try E to E, F to F, and so forth. But I try doing it without stopping. You're not always going to be successful because it's just the nature of the instrument, where some notes are going to be more resonant than others, so you're trying to minimize that. Now when I do all of these things, yes, it's going to help me with my technique, but it's also supposed to help me in a practical way. If a piece such as Flight of the Bumblebee comes up, I think I'm prepared for that, etc. So that's where practicing that type of chromaticism comes into play in a practical way. You guys know what I mean? All right. And as I said, from a teenager, because I started this instrument when I was 11, so by the time I was 13, 14, I knew then and there what I wanted to do with my life. Not necessarily as a profession, but just do what I love. And one of the things I always wanted to do was perform as a soloist with a symphony orchestra. And I've been very blessed, to have that opportunity performing with different symphony orchestras around the world. And then I fell in love with jazz, and I tried to play with jazz combos, etc. But a lot of these exercises are done to help me in a practical fashion. Case in point, if I'm playing with a jazz combo, I will play over a jazz standard, and probably do some of that tonight at the concert. I know you guys need this. I'm not sure if you're staying for the concert, but you have patterns called 2-5-1 patterns. So let's say in the key. I know this might be a little technical, but I'll just try to go through it really quickly. D minor 7 in the key of C, which is the 2 chord. And then G7, which is the 5 chord, and 1 chord C major 7. So I'll try to find a different permutation of that. And then I'll try to do it in all 12 keys. If I see a 2-5-1 chord progression, I have different lines I can play over that, and I can execute it technically as well. All right? Make sense? Yeah. So fun. Yes, Kevin?
How do you know, say like you're reading music, might phrase differently, like on fire.
How to phrase? Okay, Kenny's question is, when I'm learning a piece, it can be a classical piece, how do I know how to phrase? Now, a lot of that is subjective, all right? Because a lot of times, most times we learn from our teachers, who learn from their teachers, and they're passing down information, right? Now, there are some teachers, honestly, that are very very traditional, and they will learn something one particular way, and that's the way they want you to play. I'm not that type of teacher. For example, I have a lot of my students that will play my pieces. I'll tell them what I was thinking about that particular piece. This is how I approach it. But at the end of the day, once they do that, I want them to put their heart and soul into it and interpret it in different ways. Because who's going to pay to hear people play the same piece, the same way? That's boring, right? So, so a lot of that, you'll learn from your teacher, and some of it you'll develop on your own over time with experience. And I can't emphasize this enough, but for me, what music is about vocabulary. It's about speaking, all right? It's a language. So the way that you speak is not always going to be the same from year to year. You'll phrase things differently. You'll learn new words. The way I played when I was 17 years old is almost totally different to now. That's because I've learned new musical words and developed vocabulary and creating new sentences. So I hope that made sense. Another thing you can do, again, in keeping with almost all the time, but different exercises you can work on. For example, you can try playing double stops, so two notes together. So for example, E flat is my lowest note. I'll play a minor third, so E flat and G flat. I'll play it together, right? And then I'll go up in chromatic half steps, so E flat, G flat, E, G, and etc. And I'll do that with a metronome, maybe play 8 notes, eventually trying to get to 16 notes. Once I feel like I've conquered that, I don't feel like I've conquered anything, but once I'm at a spot where it's sort of acceptable, then I'll try to push the envelope, try to create something new. So instead of a minor third, I'll do major third, so E flat and G. And then I just keep going on by intervals. Fourths, etc. Until you get to major sevenths, which sound kind of ugly, but they're fun to practice. Somebody needs to practice. I can't do it right now. It's always find different ways to manipulate patterns. Again, another chromatic pattern I can do, a major triad. I might do it like, and so I'll go E flat to G flat, E, F sharp, and I'll go E to G. So I'm doing it in groups of 4, and I'll try doing it all the way up without stopping. Etc. And you keep going up and up. It's all about pushing yourself and trying to be the best that you can be. Any questions? Yes. Okay, the question is, how long do I practice? When I was younger and I didn't have as many responsibilities, I practiced a lot. I can't tell you how many hours, because the thing for me is, because I love this so much, usually it didn't seem like work. So it was just having fun and still developing as a musician. But if I had to guess, I would probably say 4 or 5 hours a day. Now if I can get a couple hours in, I'm lucky. But because I worked so hard when I was younger, it's helped me nowhere. I still need to practice, but maybe not as much. And I'm not the kind of teacher that thinks for you to develop, it has to be sweat and tears all the time. You can have fun and still develop, but you definitely need to have respect for whatever instrument you play, or whatever you do in life. You need to have the proper respect for it and put in that hard work. Because a lot of people, they talk the talk, they say the right things. Yeah, I want to be the best musician in the world, and this is what I'm going to do. This is what I have to do. But a lot of times they don't do it, and then they wonder why they're not getting results. But it's mainly because they're not doing what they say they have to do. All right, so that's a lesson in life for you guys. Don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk. All right, so thanks everybody.